Hi everyone, my name's Nicole Rogerson and I'm from Autism Awareness Australia. Welcome to our new Ought to Know webinar series. We're going to have one each month and they're going to have different focuses. There will be webinars specially designed for parents of very young children, webinars like today, which are around school-age children, and then we'll have a third stream that will be around adult years. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm really happy to say that we're kicking it off with clinical psychologist from Minds and Hearts Clinic in Brisbane, Dr. Hugh Walker.
It's a pleasure to be here, and especially this time of the year when there's lots of transitions going on, and have a bit of a discussion around how to help with this.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And I should say I'm Nicole Rogerson from Autism Awareness Australia, but I feel like I know everybody here. So yeah, look, obviously being January and being a couple of weeks from the start of school, we felt like this was the best topic to kick the year off. And Hugh, I've known you for some time, so I know this is a topic that you're very well versed in speaking about. I think what's interesting, I suspect with the people that are joining us today, we've got a bit of a mix of parents. So we're going to have parents whose little ones are starting school for the very first time, which is quite a different experience than maybe a child changing schools or changing from primary to high school, as opposed to just the rest of the school population, which are kids that are probably just changing class, going up a year and getting a new teacher. So there's going to be lots of different versions of new. But I heard a phrase this week called the Sunday scaries, meaning that Sunday nights can sometimes be a bit nervous. And I imagine the night before school, we're going to have a lot of very nervous little one and probably really nervous parents as well.
Mm.
What are some of the things parents can do now while holidays are still on that can alleviate some of that starting school stress?
Yeah, great question, Nick. So, and just in terms of my background, so I am a clinical psychologist and work at Minds and Hearts in Brisbane, and have worked in this area for 15 years. And I guess what I've found is it's helpful to anchor parents to probably about 6 main points. I'd say routine is a really critical strategy, because in general, autistic people find unexpected changes in the routine to be hard. So if part of what we can do now is to prepare for what the routine will be like come Monday or whenever that first day of school is, then their brain is starting to get a sense of the procedure, and there's going to be less overwhelm and overload to handle if we're just doing a big step up into a new routine within a 24-hour period. So if in this week, things like planning a visual schedule of, so for the younger kids, it could be a visual schedule of what's going to happen in that morning routine, or even the night before when you're preparing. I think also from a sensory point of view, for the younger kids who haven't worn a uniform before, it's really important to just start seeing if maybe you've got an occupational therapist who's been working with this with you, but just seeing from a sensory point of view, how are there any modifications that need to be made to the uniform, in terms of where you'll find out options with your school, whether there's the option to use a sports uniform or reverse seams, cutting tags, these sorts of things. The looseness of fit, whether it's comfortable. So trying on the uniform. The shoes can be very tight and socks can be itchy. So again, just seeing what options are available to make your child comfortable. Because they're going to be stressed, their sensory sensitivities tend to amplify during change and unexpected routines. In terms of previewing, this is a really important point. We want to balance how much information you share. So for some younger kids, just small chunks of information. You've got to treat your information as if it's like, $100. You've got 100 points of information to share. Don't just sort of be verbose, because you'll overwhelm the child and lead to more uncertainty. So no information, it's too uncertain. Too much information, too many questions, too much uncertainty. So we're just trying to kind of watch your child and make sure you get the sweet spot, watching their non-verbals if they look overwhelmed, and just pulling back and waiting for tomorrow to plan a bit more info. And I can keep going.
Part of that is part of that, Hugh, because as a parent, you might not know what the routine's going to be that morning at school, because for that teacher or that particular school, the parent's probably going to not know. So when you're referring to understanding the routine, is that a little bit more what we're going to do? We're going to have brekkie, and then we're going to brush our teeth, and then we're going to whatever it happens to be in the routine. Is that down to what time are we going to be leaving the house? That kind of information, or is that too much?
It's good. I think, yeah, we have to decide what's the important things and what's the less important things. So you remind me, the first thing is for a parent to just regulate themselves and take a breath and call upon your supports. Because if we are anxious, then we'll transmit that to our children. They'll go, oh, okay, something really scary is happening. So I guess it's important for us to maybe think about a plan, whether you have support through your health professionals or your family system, just to be talking about, like we are now, talking about your plan. In terms of what are some key bits of information, yeah, wake up time. I think there's going to be a shift in holiday in terms of how you want to do your routine. I guess there'll be a lot of device usage. There'll be a lot of like chilling, sleeping in, kind of just, absorbing in the corner of their bedroom, just kind of enjoying special interest time. So that's where it could be quite an abrupt and whiplash kind of change if we aren't saying, okay, well, now whatever the family wants to do, iPads go in this room before bed, and so we won't be able to use them until we're up, showered and dressed and breakfast. So there'll be different routines for different families, but I would say, 4 or 5 points, no more than five is probably a good metric of
And
choosing.
would you recommend starting some of those things, such as if the new rule is, we're not going to do devices in the morning, we're going to get up and do this. Is that worth trialing a few days earlier so that it's not on day one?
Exactly. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying is to the extent that with some of my high school kids going into year 7, they're actually catching a bus with their parent. If there was, say, 2 bus routes, practicing getting there, getting back on a no school day with no other school children. Because of the visual movement and the noise, it's very good to have some feel of how that routine is going to be minus sensory overwhelm. And that, because when the sensory overwhelm is added to that routine, it'll be harder to think clearly and make decisions.
One of
Sponsor
the things
session.
I remember, Hugh, back in 100 years ago when my child started school, was we actually went to the school a few times during the holidays to have a look at it. And obviously it was closed, but to walk around the school grounds and see the play equipment. Is that sort of something, again, I feel like you were saying you don't want to overwhelm them and give them too much information, but is a little bit exposure to the new environment a good idea?
Certainly. What I'm saying with overwhelm is in a given interaction, in a sort of a 2 minute, 5 minute period, don't overwhelm them in that. You want to spread out the information across time, across days and weeks. So it's best practice to visit the school physically. I know we're getting a bit close to school return. So just know that going forward, if you didn't get a chance to visit the school and you can't get a chance to visit the premises within the week, because sometimes there's staff days coming up where students won't be
Okay.
there, and
Yeah.
you can ask if you've got a contact, I need my child to come and visit the school, see the playground with me, see where the toilets are, see where I guess there will be some questions like, if I have a problem, where do I go? There might be certain kids that ask a lot of what if questions, and we try and give some information, but you could also be feeding generalized anxiety. So sometimes you can return to their question with another question, like, what do you think you could do? And let's have a look together. So yeah, so visiting the school, typically a couple of times. In an ideal world, we would have visited the key support people. If it's a primary school, it's your year teacher. If it's a high school, it might be the year coordinator or a housemaster. And so that when there's any chance of emotional overwhelm and the child has to leave the classroom and go to a quieter, isolated or shut down place to recover, then they've got someone that they've trusted and they've built a bit of a rapport with already.
Okay, well, then I have a question around parents because parents are going to need as much support as the child in this
Mm.
particular instance. What advice would you give parents about introducing their child's diagnosis to the teacher? I mean, I would think for the vast majority of people would have already communicated with the school that their child has a diagnosis and the school is ready for that. But I guess, parents are the experts in their child and they want to give that information to the teacher. But at the same time, I guess the teacher is going to be a little bit leave it with me. How do parents navigate that bit of communication, particularly on day one when the teacher's probably got, 30 new kids to deal with?
It's a great point, and I think my experience is teachers are very overwhelmed as well, having their transition back. And I think it's important to really think carefully about how, similar to overwhelming our child with too much information, we can overwhelm the teacher with too much information and they can feel sometimes a bit helpless to read through all the reports. So I think it is from a funding point of view, sometimes there's additional funding that schools can get to support your child with the teacher's aid and things. So the documentation has to be sent if that's your choice to share that information so that the teachers and the school can understand what the needs and what the triggers are likely to be to help with them regulate at school. But I think I found it very helpful to add a one-page summary that just sits at the top, often written by the parents, that have about 5 things: name, grade, diagnosis, if comfortable sharing that. Second, strengths. Here's what my child excels at or enjoys, which can be a great tool for regulation as your child's distressed in this transition period. Here's where they need specific help. So for non-speaking autistic kids, it could be, we need Proloquo to go on an iPad in the school so that they can be provided choices. And here are certain things that work, proven methods that we found for managing challenging behavior or understanding what the behavior means, so that what my child's wanting me to understand and hear in their behavior. And also, here are the triggers. So I think that is very useful for a teacher just to be able to see quickly strengths, needs, strategies that work, and triggers. If you're not sure as a parent what to write, go and see a health professional who's working with your child, whether it's a speech pathologist, OT, or a psychologist, behavior support person, and they can really get that summary. The reality is when I sometimes go to an individual education plan meeting, very few people have had a chance to read some of those big reports that I'm guilty of writing that might be 20 pages, which are important for things like NDIS and funding. But in terms of, a teacher with 30 kids in the class who are all different, they need something quick that they can read within about a minute.
And is it important to set up a communication agreement with the teacher or the school? Like I imagine for parents, you're really anxious. It seems like 6 hours in a school. It feels like a really long day. What did they do? But this is a really different relationship than you might have had with a therapist working with your child. This is a teacher who's busy, who doesn't want to sit down and debrief with you for half an hour every afternoon. But you kind of want to know as a parent, is it good to upfront have that discussion with the teacher to sort of set expectations so that you as a parent aren't too needy, but you've also got to get the feedback as to how your child's going?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we've got to have a few assumptions in our mind that your child, has the right to your advocacy, and that the teacher is desiring to make your child's experience go as well as they can. So I think there's obviously you're going to always meet different professionals, but I think those assumptions just believe them to be true and take that first step and ask the question. I'm really interested in ensuring my child has a good experience, and can I just ask, I've read that it's useful to have an initial meeting and to keep communication going through the school. What's the best way that we can set that up? So I guess giving some autonomy to the teacher and the school to give them as a question, not like we have to meet now and we have to have a meeting every day, but I really want to ensure this goes smoothly. What's the best way that's going to work with the school? That's a good way to start the relationship. And I guess in some cases it's going to go well. If you feel that for whatever issue there is systemic issues with communication, then that's something to talk about within your family and with your professionals to work out, okay, is the culture right? But 99% of the time it's it's going to work well. You might want to be bringing in other people. If it's the first year of school, often it's a bit of an observation. It's a bit of an assessment, like how's things going to go? Let's work out what needs there are, because the school won't, in some cases, for the first year, have brought in early diverse learning and support, school counsellors. Whereas as you continue through and the school understands your child's needs better, you're going to have a much better transition from, say, kindy to year one, or from year 8 to year 9. So there is a bit of observation in this first period for those people starting a new school altogether. But for people that are going up a year, I think we're wanting to get that email chain sorted with communication, to get the transition next year even more smoother. Another point I'd say is a lot of parents worry about coming across in a difficult way with the school, primarily because of a phenomenon with autistic kids that, like, Professor Atwood would have called the Jekyll and Mr. Hyde phenomenon, or some people say delayed emotional expression, where a child can be observed to be absolutely angelic and perfect at school, but then comes home and there are rageful meltdowns and anger towards parents because they've been suppressing and detaching from a lot of sensory overload. So I think it's important, if you feel misunderstood, to refer to some discussions around delayed emotional expression, or that sort of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde effect, so that the teachers don't think you're contriving this distress, and you can work together. Because what will happen is you'll need the school to make some adjustments and some movement breaks, some sensory breaks, so that at the end of the day there's less distress that needs to be expressed in that rage.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you want your child to be good at school, though. So, right, there's these two competing factors. They seem to be coping well at school. What are some of the signs, other than the child coming down and coming home and completely melting down? That's a sign to the parent. But how do we make teachers aware of what some of those signs are? Do we have to give almost like a behaviour support plan to the teacher going in to alleviate some of what you were just talking about?
If what I was just talking about is happening and that there's regular meltdowns at home, then we do need to start conversations with the school to make some modifications. If I'll come back to that, but circling back to, say, kids that are starting and the school doesn't have any information yet, and we don't know how the child's going to respond, I think as parents, we're looking out for any physical discomfort that's manifesting in the body. Because, for example, non-speaking children with autism, as well as some autistic kids who find it uncomfortable or they're not aware of their emotional experience due to low interoception, what we'll see is the anxiety builds, and it'll be in the stomach or the headaches. And so those discomforts, I guess ordinarily we'd go to the GP. If there's no explanation, we're looking at anxiety discharged into those smooth muscles, those organs. And so we are starting to be alert, but not alarmed. But okay, is anxiety a problem here? I think anxiety is going to be understandable in the first week, maybe the second week. If it's persisting after week 3, week 4, we'd be thinking, okay, we want to, I guess, avoid school refusal down the track. As the child may not be consciously aware of their anxiety, but they may be aware of a relief when they get home, or if there was, say, an escalation in behavior that led them to get sent home in some circumstances, then they go, oh, that feels good to be at home. And so there could be some reinforcement of that if we don't address it early on. I'd say the other things to look out for, Nick, are changes in your child's behavior. So let's talk about high school for a minute. If you feel as though your child's spending a lot of time, like less time socializing, avoiding, even in primary school, we're looking out for bullying, we're looking out for peer rejection, and we're trying to get a sense of if we can get that information from the child or the teacher, anyone observing. Increased irritability when discussing school-related topics. If you see a greater intensity of emotion with change and when we have to shift focus from their special interests, that's a problem. Or increased procrastination. So I just encourage, yeah, open communication with the school to understand what's happening. I think for a lot of particularly late primary school and high school, one of the routines you're wanting to be developing is what does the child do when they come home from school? And for the teenage clients and children, you're negotiating that with them and thinking, is it going to be best that they just get home and there's no homework and they just absorb themselves on a screen, in a book? Do they need more movement? Do they need a big meal because they might have, with their medications, they might not have eaten their lunch and, they're kind of having this sugar crash. So we want to be really mindful just how much their brains have had to process social cognition, sensory, and the change. So really be nurturing and avoid too much demand and maybe those strict expectations when your child's coming home because they might not be in their best mind to handle the usual demands, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it may not be a great time to start a new ballet class or
Oh,
something straight
absolutely.
after school, right? Just
Yeah,
chill
yeah.
and let them get settled in. To go back to a topic you just brought up, which I know it can be a little bit controversial, but the idea of school refusal, which I
Mm,
imagine lots of parents are dealing with at various times. Now, school refusal can come in many forms and can be really, really serious, or it can just be some resistance. Um, what are some of the strategies if a parent now 2 weeks out is getting the yeah, no, I won't be going to school kind of feedback from their child? This is typically probably going to be a child that's already been in school, has already had some experience, and hence doesn't want to return.
mm, mm. So I guess I'd be saying it sounds like there's some really good reasons you don't want to go to school right now. Like, can you tell me a bit about them? I really want to understand what's been difficult. So in the first instance, it's exploring with them the problem. So if we may have the urge to say, cut it out, you're going to school, don't be silly, which is going to lead to their trust in sharing what the problems are. It's going to withdraw, and we're not able to solve and work together collaboratively. So I think in the first instance, it's trying to regulate their anxiety enough so that they might be able to communicate in some way what the stress is, whether we're using visuals to point and work out what that is, or verbal language to communicate what the issues are. Then we can actually modify the triggers and try and get that sense of trust with the child to say, I understand what you're saying and I'm going to work to modify that. How about we start? I guess there's so many different variations of a solution. Some solutions are, I'll be in the car park to pick you up at lunch should you feel the need to come home. And then the child's like, okay, cool. If you're there, I'll go. And then they don't need to be picked up. Sometimes it's around a sensory uniform thing that we can modify. Sometimes it could be around a bullying thing. There's a bully put in their class and they're not feeling comfortable to know what to do. Talking to the school about that, having peer mentors support a place for them to go where they're not vulnerable and isolated to being targeted. Um, so I guess there's so many different answers to what the solution is, but we won't know unless we have trust and connection to share and say, well, we hear you, what you're saying is important. Let's see if we can help that. And then perhaps let's try it for a week and let's do a review, see what's still troubling you, and we'll see if we can make some more modifications. Obviously, you're going to get to a place where you decide that the school can no longer make more modifications. Um, and that's when people have considered distance education and homeschooling. And that can be a really helpful strategy for some people at various points of their schooling careers. Sometimes they return after that period. Might have been a depression. They can return or some bullying, trauma, and some people decide that they're learning best without that environment of the mainstream schooling.
That's a question, Hugh, because I kind of worry that and this is why I guess it's really important to work with a really good school and make sure you've chosen a school that want to work with you, because ultimately we want kids to be going to school. We want the social experience, we want the inclusive experience, and finding schools too hard does make me worry. Your child's an adult for many more years than they're a child. you sort of don't want life refusal in the long run either. So is school refusal something that it can be improved over time if we're all working towards the goal of making sure kids can be included in the things that they want to be included in?
Absolutely. I guess the school refusal is an avoidance. It's a coping strategy due to high anxiety. And like anyone, we have a fight, a flight, and a freeze. And so this is the flight. This is the escape. So I guess PDA classically, it's an anxiety-based condition to avoid demands that are feeling threatening. That they could be various. They could be sensory-based. It could be social-based, anxiety-based, ADHD based in terms of their impulse control and that they can't sit still for that long. So all of these are avoidance based solutions. So school refusal is a solution for the child. It's a solution to a more painful problem, the more painful problem of having to experience their anxieties and their perceived threats. And some of them are very real threats. So we can work together, reduce that anxiety so that the need to avoid is not as great. And we can build confidence and a belief that, oh, people understand me, they understand my needs, they take them seriously, and I can be heard. And so I can have school to work for me. Hopefully that's where we try and get to. And I think 80% of the time we can get there. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have to choose different options.
Yeah, and I guess some of those is in choosing these different options, and I'm wondering what you think the line is here for parents. So, not everyone's going to have a really positive school and a school that's happy to communicate with parents and make accommodations. I mean, it's a bit hard to believe in the year 2025 we don't, but the truth is some schools in some pockets in Australia really aren't terribly welcoming. At what point at what point do parents call it, right? I appreciate for those dialing in from sort of rural and regional Australia, you might not have this luxury. But if you're living in a metro city in Australia and you can make choices, at what point, as if a school is so unwelcoming and it's going to be so unsuccessful, then that is traumatizing to make it work for the child. But we know that in the right setting with the right supports and a child can be successful at school, that's setting them up for some fantastic skills to have later in life. So when does a parent know when to pull the pin? When do you work out whether or not, another choice has to be made without the child making it feel like it was their fault?
Mm. Okay. Well, there's some like the typical strategies is you want to feel as though you've exhausted what you can change in the environment and you've advocated for the school to do that. There are also, like, I'm often writing letters to the school around term 3, term 4 to have some breaks. I want my client to be able to have a home day as well, if that's what the parents want, and then we do tracking of the meltdowns. And if we get a reduction in meltdown to have one day off a week, that's keeping that experience to be ultimately positive, and there's less shame for the child when they act in a way that they can't control because of that build-up of stress. So let's say we've tried all these things. I think we're looking at things like depression as a canary in the coal mine. So that's things like anhedonia, which is a lack of pleasure and interest in things that you used to find interesting, particularly the special interests. If those topics aren't bringing a smile to your child's face, you've got concern around just more generally that they could be suffering from a mental health challenge. So I think that's where the child's also learning things about the world and society that people don't understand me. I seem to be defective in some way, and when they're learning maladaptive things because of how they're being treated or how they're not getting along, I think that's the concern for me, that we risk increasing the chance of a lifelong depression or mental health issue. And so looking at, you have choices, we can change things and we can make things work better for you in this situation. Maybe that school's not the right place. Maybe there's other options, can be liberating, and you can see a pretty quick improvement in mental health within a few weeks, I'd say, when you change.
I love the idea of tracking though. That is, because that's sometimes when you're the parent and you're really worried, it all seems to be, oh my God, it's terrible every day. It's terrible. But really it might not be. And it's good for you as the parent, as well as your communication with the school, to be able to track how many afternoons were unsuccessful when they got home, or what's improving, what's going well. Is that good to have between the teacher and the parent as well, Hugh? Some kind of written communication between one another, so that we can say what's going on at home if there is something that's relevant that the teacher should know?
Um, I guess the needs are going to depend on the child and the teachers. The teacher has limited resources. I think, yeah, if your child's having significant meltdowns at home or at school, it's daily communication. It could be a communication book where they're just getting some sort of note around uh, morning, lunch, afternoon. Could be a ranking system. It could just be
Yeah.
I've seen stamps, but yeah, what gets measured gets managed in a much better way. So I think it's really important to monitor so that you're making decisions based on data and evidence rather than that feel and using the teacher's perspective, given that they've often they're teaching upwards of 30 kids and in their career they've seen hundreds of kids, so they might have a good benchmark for you because we don't really know how's my child going relative to other autistic and neurodiverse kids that have been taught here, just to give me a benchmark of that if I'm particularly anxious.
Yeah, been through the school. Thank you for coming on this morning and taking your time to talk to us. I'm assuming there's lots of very nervous parents out there about to start the school year, but it's really important to be able to talk about it and make schools better. I know for lots of families, I would have to say autism awareness is number one reason parents get in contact with us is usually stresses around school. So I know it's a very prevalent feeling for a lot of our families, but I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us about it.
Little thing that
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to go through would be little something I made up just to guide us here. So it's really patient parents build trusting transitions. So the R for really stands for routines early.
Okay.
The patient stands for previewing, and I didn't really go into all of previewing. I said verbally it can mean sharing some information, but we can also be looking at the school website, brochures,
Oh
up
yeah.
until
Yeah.
going to the campus. Uh, P for parents, prepare for unexpected changes, but balancing, titrating information, not zero information, but not too much information. And your child and the age of your child, their capacities will dictate how much is enough. Um, and then B is for certain kids that really going to ask a lot of questions. They kind of need a plan B. What if the bus doesn't come on time? Okay, well, I'll pick you up from the stop and then I'll drive you so you're on time. Okay. So some kids, I wouldn't always lead with plan Bs because it's going down that encouraging maybe too much information, but some kids just need some reassurance for those what
And you
ifs.
don't want to plant an idea.
Yeah.
What if? Oh, I wasn't even thinking
Yes,
about
exactly. Yeah.
that.
Only when needed. Only when needed.
Yep.
So yeah, alternative strategies for common snags. Where do I sit? When I arrive, just a few little things if they need that. Um, Trusting transit. So T for trusting is transitional warnings. So when we're getting ready in the morning, visual timers. There's a common method where you're front loading what's next. So first this, then that. That's really important. Even as your kids get older, they still need that mental model. First this, then that, so that their brain's already preparing for the transition while they're in the first activity. And lastly, when we do transitions, I guess a goal for us is to put transition as a kind of routine. So you think about transition, what it means is change. So if we can have a transitional routine with the younger kids, it might be a chant, pack away together. So when we're starting to transition, they go, oh, okay, here's the song where I know this routine. So if we can get procedural memory, which is a different part of the brain, rather than real frontal lobe, which is like, oh God, something new, I haven't seen this before, that can lead to sort of smoothness. So yeah, really patient parents building trusting transitions, routines, previews, prepare for unexpected change, plan Bs, transitional warnings, transitional routines for procedural memory. I think that framework can apply to a lot of different ages and different kids that we're talking to the parents of today.
And I love the fact that I got you to sing on this webinar. It almost feels like the end credits, like cue the song, it's time to go. Hugh, I love it. That was also terribly, terribly practical. And I think parents can adjust all of those tips to depending on their child's age and stage and their communication levels. But there's some wonderful, basic first principles in there that was great to remind everyone of today.